Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue, and this technique is what I call mining for art. So I'll just take some interesting shapes, a handful of interesting shapes, and I'll throw those into a replicator, and I'll make a point cloud, and then I'll just sort of move the camera around and see if I can find anything interesting in these smushed together shapes. And I'll render that out at a higher resolution, like 4K here. And then you can go in and crop or image manipulate and do some other stuff in Photoshop if you want to, and just see if there's any sort of interesting, sort of cool imagery I can get out of this without really putting into a lot of work. And in fact, this scene, all of these little meshes here, they're smushed together. It's just one material on them. These are rendered in Octane. It's just one layered material with some subsurface scattering and some specular shininess on there, and a little bit of sheen on there as well. And there's there's a slightly different color per replica. But really, it's just a real simple way of just kind of screwing around and see if you can come up with something cool. And so, there's this sort of big field of shapes. I got these from ArtStation. These were created by somebody named Carl Andreas. It's like $4.55 for just a whole bunch of cool little meshes there. And then I made those into mesh presets and used those with a replicator to kind of make something cool. Going back to Photoshop here, like I said, I rendered these at 4K, so you can kind of really push in and move around and try to find something interesting. I'm just going to kind of go through some different layers here, some different renders. Whoops, there we go, maybe like that. And here's another one. And so again, it's a very, it has a sort of pinkish look, and that's just a different camera response curve in Octane, which if you don't use those, I could show you. But again, it's just a real simple way of getting some different looks out of this, as well as a lot of depth of field. Just kind of trying to get like an alien looking landscape, a sort of or alien virus landscape in there. That one's kind of cool looking. There's one from above looking down. There's another one with another camera response curve on there. A few more. That's below the mass. Another one there. And so, I can go on here and look for something interesting. Like I can maybe kind of crop this with this mass over to the left and sort of frame this stuff in the middle and crop it and look at that. Since I rendered it at 4K, I can still zoom in quite a bit. And it looks kind of cool. So, this is just a fun way to play around with the 3D program and try to create some interesting abstract art. And if I go over to MODO, so I'll just break down this scene real quick and then maybe create a new one just to show you how I did it. There's one kind of cool technique I used in here with a vector map, which I don't think many people know about. But here it is. It's just a mass of shapes, right? Just a mass of shapes. And I'm using this plane right here to just as a point source for the replicator, right? So just all these points here. Actually, that's not true. The plane is, this is where I'll show you something kind of fun. So the plane is being fed into a surface particle generator right here. And if you can see, maybe if I go to wireframe, you can see the little orange dots. That's where all the little particles are. And then, of course, that's fed into a replicator. The cool thing is with the plane, if I hide the replicator here, you'll see, let me just go to a polygon mode and select this vector map here. You see these vectors, these sort of look like hairs coming up. I don't have to be in wireframe. This is determining some of the orientation and scale of some of the replicas, which is kind of fun, which I'll show you how that works in a moment. And then just like I said, I created I buy kit bash stuff all the time. And I tend to put it in, like here's some skulls I bought off of ArtStation. I tend to make mesh presets out of them so I can just grab them whenever I want. And if I look at the abstract shapes, here's all the abstract shapes. Now it is really tedious to put all these things into as mesh presets because you have to do it one at a time. In fact, if any of you out there who make plugins are watching, I would love just to iterate through an entire directory of OBJs or something or FBX files, something I buy off of ArtStation or Gumroad, and create a whole directory of MODO mesh presets. But what I basically did is I just went through here and grabbed things like this one and this one or whichever, things that I thought were interesting, and brought them into the scene as prototypes for my replicator. And so I look at my prototypes here. Let me just turn this on. I'll turn off my plane there. We'll just do this one at a time. How about, why don't I just turn on my little isolate button there. And so you can see how these little guys are, these little branches are all sort of the little tendrils poking through the main blob, and there's all these sort of spherical blobs. I don't think I used this one. I think I used most of these, though. These little spherical blobs that are through there. Kind of cool looking coral type shapes. Sort of alien pollen or fungus or something. I don't know. Thought it would look interesting all smushed together, right? And then what I did is I put all those in a group. So here's the group, right? And right there, that's all the guys in the group. And then that group is actually fed into the replicator. So I go back and look at my replicator. You know, I've got the plane with the vectors on it as the feeding into a surface particle generator, which is fed into the replicator for the point source and with some scale and orientation data coming from the plane. And then all the prototypes being fed from this group right here, and it just sprinkles them about. So, you know, once you have that set up, and I'll do a setup in a second here, but just sort of going through this scene. One of the things about the surface particle generator, which is, it's a really old part of MODO. It's great, but it's really old, and it requires, you know, the things being fed into it to be visible for it to work. So for that to work, it has to be, your plane has to be visible, and you just make it unrenderable. You just go down here like to mesh and put render to no, or if you're using Octane like I am, you'll just turn off the visibility like that, so the mesh doesn't render. Yeah, so, and then, yeah, you just push in. Like I said, there's just one material on everything, so I put, you know, I made materials different colors to get a little better idea of where everything is when I'm looking through the camera and trying to find like a cool, you know, framing in here. But really, everything's just the same material. So if I turn on all here, that is just an Octane Override right here that you can see. And this is a layered material in Octane. This isn't an Octane tutorial, but I do have a layered material Octane tutorial if you want to check it out, where the base material is a subsurface scattering. And I am using the new random walk subsurface scattering in Octane 20 or 2020. And then I am using a random color input to a gradient. And so this gradient just gives a slightly different color, just sort of a little faded yellow to faded orange for each of these guys. And then it's layered with a sort of a specular layer and a sheen layer that's sort of a cyan color. And that gives us really it's just the one material that's on all of these different guys here. You can kind of see that cyan sheen on the very edges here. You see that right there? There's that sheen. And then the specular, of course, is the highlights, and then the subsurface scattering of the sort of muted yellow to muted orange. That's everything in this entire shot. And the reason the tendrils are kind of white is they're really thin, right? So the subsurface scattering isn't, the density of the subsurface scattering isn't really playing into effect. If I made it a lot denser, these wouldn't be white. They would start to take on these colors. But that's just something you can play with within Octane or MODO if you're using MODO. MODO has pretty much all the same parameters, but Octane's a little bit faster if you've got GPUs, so I used Octane for this. So when you're making it, let me just hide the schematic and maybe make a new scene. I'll show you how this vector map works, which is pretty neat. So if I do a plane here, we'll just hold shift and make a plane. There it is. And I'm just going to go to polygon mode, press 3, and I'm going to scale it up in polygon mode. So the scale is still 100% here in item mode. And I'm going to then just do some faceted subdivide. So, you know, Shift D and then make sure it's on faceted. And just subdivide this a few times. Let me turn on wireframes like this. And so wherever there's a vertex, I'm going to have a vector to be able to manipulate. And I'll show you how that works. So I'll just subdivide it quite a few times here, I guess. And then let's grab some items to use as prototypes. So in this case, I'll just use, let's do a preset browser. So let me grab a few things here. Let me grab, let's do this in a sort of, let's do some sort of geometric stuff for this. So let's grab these guys here. So I'm just going to right click and hit load, and it's going to bring these into the scene. I think that's probably enough. And then I'll grab some longer tendril type things like this to sort of poke through. Maybe some of these guys, which are kind of geometric looking. So let me grab some of these sort of tower looking things. Maybe 3 or 4 of those. this guy. Okay, so hide the preset browser there. So I've got all this stuff there, and I'm not worried about the scale because I can adjust the scale in the replicator. But I do want to take all these guys. I just want to clean my scene up a little bit, so I'm going to put all these guys in one group folder. I don't really like it that it just makes a group folder for from the mesh when you drag these in from the preset browser, but that's what it does. So I'm going to delete all those, and I just pressed Control G to put that in a group there. We'll just call these a proto group, or protos. That's good enough. I always like my camera light at the top. I don't know, it just makes me feel better. So, okay, so making a new group, I just grab these guys here, and we go over here to the Groups tab, and I just say New Group, and we'll call this Prototypes. That's a group item, which is different. I know there's so many things in MODO called group. I see in Blender that I think they're calling them collections. I think that may be a better name for that. But this is a group of items here in the group list, which is different than a group folder in the item list, or the item list over here. Of course, you know that if you've used MODO a lot, but if you're a new user watching this, I thought I'd point that out. Okay, so these are all in here, and we'll use that as a feeder to the replicator. And so add new item, REP replicator, whoops, REP replicator right there. And so there's our replicator. I'm going to do this in the schematic just so you can kind of see how these connections. You don't really have to use the schematic. You can just use these drop downs here to pick our things, but I'll use the schematic. The plane we want to use as a particle source eventually. And then, of course, we want to use this prototype group here. So add selected, and I'll feed that into prototypes. And then one more thing I want to add here is just the surface particle generator, which is a great flexible item with lots of properties. But man, we could use an update to this thing. Okay, so I'm going to add this to the schematic. And again, you don't have to do this in the schematic. You can just pick the source surface here, which is the plane, and you'll see this connection building. But you can also do it in the schematic. So I'll go like this, and then our surface particle generator, we're going to change the average spacing to like 0.5 to reduce the number of prototypes in there. And then on the replicator itself, I'm going to reduce the base scale, which you'll find down here, base scale. Now I could just press C, making sure I'm in item mode, and drag that down. And let me actually go over to my group here, prototype group, and hide those. And so you can kind of see where this is going. We're getting some, we're moving the scale down so they're not too crowded, but I do want them to intersect. And I think these sort of towery looking ones I'm going to make bigger. So just look at my prototypes and these sculpt base here. That's the these tower ones. I'm actually going to make those a little bigger so they kind of shoot up through like that. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay. And now that I've got the base scale down, I can increase the density by just going to the surface particle generator and just lowering the average spacing. So a lot more dense there. And then, of course, we can adjust some size and things like that. But I'm actually going to do that with these vectors. So if you go back to the plane, and we hide the replicator, and you see our plane here, I can go over here to the vertex map list, and under Other Maps, hit New Map, and you can go down to where it says Vector Map. And you're thinking, oh, I've never seen that before. What's that used for? It's actually really interesting. So it puts all these little hairs here like this, and vectors store scale and directional information. And we can manipulate that with the hair tools, oddly enough, the hair sculpting tools. So I'm actually going to use, let me just bring I'm just going to press Shift and bring a cone into my universe here. And just to illustrate how this works, I'm actually going to bypass our surface particle generator. I'm just going to put the plane in here. And then I'm going to use the cone as the prototype. I'll turn my replicator back on. And so you can see all the cones here, right? Now, if I go over to my plane, in fact, let's just make these cones red so they show up a little bit better in the viewport here. So, boom, red cones, like so. And I can hide my master cone there. So, got all these cones. I'm going to keep this plane visible for now so you can see what I'm doing with the vectors. In fact, let me just hide the replicator. So, again, back with the plane. You can see these vectors there. So I can go into item, or like polygon mode here, component mode, and I go over here to the sculpting tools, and I go over to my hair tools. In fact, I'm not even sure I have to be in polygon mode, but I'll just stay there. I'm manipulating components. So, okay, so I can do things like Just get the move and sort of scale my brush a bit and watch my vectors here. See, I could push them in. I could sort of manipulate these guys and push them around. And that information will be fed to my my prototypes if I'm using, again, the surface particle generator here. So let me hook that back up like that. Let me show the replicator, and let me increase the density a bit. In fact, I'm going to take my cone and I'm going to move it up so we don't have that big intersection there. Let me just move my cone up like so. Get a better view of it. And then on my surface particle generator, I'm going to up the density a bit by lowering the average spacing like this. Maybe that's too much. And then down at the bottom, you'll see this drop down for vector map. And I want to use my vector map here, just called vector, which is helpful. And like I said, it has both size and orientation in it. So I could do a couple of things. One, I'm just going to bump up the size with the replicator for now with a base scale. And so turn my base scale back up, get these guys in here. But you see the guys at the edge that are turned, and you see that the vector map is, those little hair-like structures are turned there. So I can manipulate these cones with all these tools here. So I can go into the comb feature, and I could just sort of comb the direction of these cones like I want it, right? And I can go over to the stretch and just sort of scale up these cones where I want them. So I'm sort of scaling up the cones there, right? Doing a faux hawk in the middle of the plane. So, you know, pretty cool, right? And I can always go back to the surface particle generator and you know, bump up the density a bit. And now we've got something kind of interesting going on here. And that's what I did in the previous scene. I just sort of randomly combed things around and scaled some stuff around, and you know, just added some variation into the particle cloud using this with this vector map, which is kind of sweet, right? So that's one way you can do it. And then, you know, next step, of course, is just to go in here and find something interesting. And I'm gonna take my cone out and put my cool stuff back in. Let me push back a bit. So obviously gonna have to lower the base scale because I had bumped it up for the cones. So I'll go back to the base scale. Make sure you're in item mode when you press the channel haul tool, otherwise you go to axis slice. I really kind of wonder if we should reserve the C tool for channel haul, and whether you're in component or item mode, but something along those lines. And so we've got, you know, something going on here. We can also go over to the replicator and do something like random 90 degree rotations, which is kind of cool. And then we can also do some additional, like you know, maybe 20%, you know, control enter, or alt control enter, 20% difference on scale, and maybe a little bit of twist left and right, maybe just a little bit, like 8%, and then a little tilting these guys a little bit, and then random scale or random Y we can do, like I guess we did a 90% random. We'll just leave that. A little more geometric looking. And then we'll go in here and see if we can find anything kind of interesting looking. Another thing you can do to sort of help out is just go in and give everything a slightly different color. So I'll go into the prototypes here, and we'll just, they all came in with a mask and a shader tree. So all these guys poking above, these sculpt bases, maybe I'll just give those a similar color, like a blue. And then everything else, I'll just do something slightly different. Some pinks and purples, or yellows and oranges maybe, so they stand out a little more. And then, yeah, okay, I can turn it off right there. And I do think, yeah, I think my pokey things are just a little too big, so I'm going to go back to those sculpt base items, go to perspective, isolate them, go to polygon mode, and then I think I'm just going to make them skinnier, so I'm going to scale on the Z and X just to get them sort of more spire-like, and then look back at my replicator here. Okay, yeah, that's more what I had in mind, something kind of like this. Something kind of cool in there like that. And then it's kind of amazing what can happen once you start incorporating depth of field and some other things. And so I'll do this with Octane. So I'm going to switch my cameras here. Did I not like that camera? What happened? My camera view there. Maybe I was in perspective and not paying attention. Something, maybe they're all too tilty over there. Maybe something like that. And then I'll make this Octane. And then we'll do a quick Octane render here. Another thing you're obviously going to want to play with is the lighting. So let me get in sort of an interesting HDR into the scene here. So let me just load up something here. So I have layer, image map, load image. Pixel Work, which he does some awesome V-Ray renders, a lot of product renders. Really great artist. He put some HDRs out, and so I think I'll use one of these guys. These are sort of studio type HDRs, so kind of panel-like lighting. You can see them here. Take it around a little bit, get a little closer in here. Not sure I like that particular one. Maybe I'll use this one. Okay. And let's work in a little depth of field into my camera. So I got my camera here. And I don't know if you don't, this is sort of turning into an Octane tutorial, but that's fine. We'll just turn off the use MODO focal distance and f-stop. And so we can use the aperture here. And you can see already we're getting that sort of cool macro photography look. And I'll use the little tool here to pick a focal point sort of in the middle maybe. And on these geometric items, I think I may go with more of a metallic material. So I'm actually going to add a group at the top here. And I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to, yeah, I'll just do one material for everything. So I'll add a group at the top here, and I'll add a material into it, and we'll just call this group all. And I'm going to do an Octane Override on this one. And again, if you haven't integrated your Octane into your standard MODO layout, there is a tutorial for that on Pixel Fondue. Just search for it. You don't have to go to the Octane tab. You just have Octane integrated into your layout here, which is really nice. So, and let me just get to the schematic here. In fact, I don't really think I need this open anymore. We'll just deal with this view. And maybe we'll do sort of maybe an ultra wide view like that. And get to my Octane material, and then instead of a glossy material, maybe let's do a metallic material like this. And then we'll let's turn the specular into maybe something like this, or maybe is there cobalt? It's cobalt's a metal, right? Cobalt? Come on, where's cobalt? No, it's not bluish. I always thought cobalt would be blue because, you know, it's cobalt. I want like sort of a darker blue look. Actually, what I should do here is do a gradient. And so what I'll do is a new texture, and you can, similar to the variation texture in MODO, you can do this in Octane with add a gradient here, and that's hooked up to specular. And then for the input, we're going to do a random color texture, and that'll do a random color based on the particle ID. So then we can go back in here and just do middle click, and over here we'll do, I want my metals. Whoops, not that one. This one? Yeah. So here's my chromium, and we'll make it sort of more bluish. And then over here, maybe a little darker blue, but not saturated again. I don't think we really want something real saturated. And so we're just getting a different sort of blue along this curve. Yeah. And what I might also do in this one is add some rounded edge shading. See if we can get some decent specular glints on this. Let me just go to accurate and radius of maybe, not sure how big those prototypes are, but maybe 5. Yeah, now we're getting something. So see these edges now? It's really adding to it. And once you get in here and start getting something kind of interesting looking like this, or we can actually, you know, if we don't like this angle, we can always twirl a bit. So that's kind of cool looking. You know, pick a focal point. Kind of like this area. And then you really just start adjusting your aperture, so I can increase this if I want more of a depth of field effect, like that, which is sort of interesting looking. And then the other thing I was doing, again, you've got some really cool camera controls here in Octane, so I can up my exposure if I want to, like so. And then these response curves, all these sort of photographic response curves, let me just push this down so you can see the big list, are pretty fun to play with, and it defaults to sRGB. It's funny because it used to default to one of the camera film response curves. I talked to Paul, who does the plugin for MODO. I was like, dude, you got to put that back on sRGB because people didn't realize they're getting a sort of a fake camera response curve in all their renders. But they're fun to play with, especially in this sort of abstract arts. And there's huge variation. So I start going through and look at Eastman Kodak Gold. You know, I'm getting a bit of a warmer tone here, like that, sort of warmer, a little bit of a greenish tone. Down here in the mist section, there's some sort of paler looking ones, sort of brighter, paler looking ones. And just, play around with it. It renders so fast that you can really spit out quite a few render tests. And so I'm just sort of randomly picking them here. I don't remember what they all do. But you find something cool like this one. And then, of course, there's more stuff you can do. You can maybe add a crypto mat, so you can spit out a crypto mat, and then you can go in and do some post-processing. But the idea is you can just get a whole bunch of images really quickly like this, just by manipulating the camera angle, manipulating the lighting. So I might go in here to the lighting and just adjusting the direction of the lighting here by the Y rotation. So let's just flip it around 180 degrees. Now we've got light coming in here to the left, got some nice highlights coming in over here. You can even do some post-processing on the camera. So go to post-processing. I've got some nice highlights, so I'm maybe going to turn this on and bump up my glare power quite a bit so I can get some glare and bloom in there. And bloom power, maybe 10. You can see it sort of coming in. So glare, crank it up like 50. That's too much. 20 or something, and maybe more glare rays, like 6. I think there's a cutoff. Yeah, so you can sort of crank the cutoff up to just get the real highlights there. So again, playing around with this to get something interesting like that. So different looking image. And then of course you can always mess with the seed values of your replicator. So I'm just going to leave the camera and the materials, the exposure, the glare, the response curve, leave it, everything the same. And in my replicator, I'm going to go over here to the seed value, which is which is right here, 401. And I'm going to say 101, like Highway 101, and I'm going to hit that. And now it's just, it reorganizes all the prototypes, and you get a different look. And you can just kind of flip through these. You just do whatever, and you just get something different every time. Like this is 69. Right? So 999, how about? Yeah, and you can also mess with the seed value of the surface particle generator as well. So there's a surface particle generator here, and there's a seed value of 151. So we'll just do this 200. So again, just getting different looking prototypes and different arrangements here, and getting kind of a cool order, cool render. And so yeah, you just save this out or re-render it a really high image, and you may want to crop into some other more interesting part with some better, maybe a little better framing or more interesting geometry. But it's just it's a lot of fun, and you can see how fast you can just really get in and do something cool. Let's just actually look down maybe and play with depth of field. Like here's some cool edge lighting there. It looks kind of techy. I like these lines here. I don't really like them being intersected so much, so I may actually I may play with the seed a little bit, see if we can get something similar, but not those intersections there. One of the things I'd like to be able to do with the replicator, and you can kind of hack this, is assign a sort of weighting to which prototypes, sort of a weighting to what the likelihood of certain prototypes to show up. Now you can do this you can sort of hack it by duplicating prototypes. So if I wanted this particular one with all these lines to show up a lot, I just make 6 of them and put them all in that group. So you'd have sort of 6 of the same thing. But it'd be fun to assign sort of a weighting or to different prototypes, so you have more of a likelihood of showing up. But I like this sort of top view here. Let me come in and it's getting a little out of focus. Looks kind of like a circuit board with all the edge highlights from that edge shader on there. That's kind of interesting. Now if I focus in on the spires, I'll get all this other stuff as a background. A little too much aperture there, so I'm going to knock that down a bit from 4 to 2, and so it's not so blurry. Maybe even 1. Anyway, you get the point. Let me find something. Now, see, now I'm just obsessing and killing. Ooh, I like that. I like those. Sort of killing time here. Maybe I'm going to focus on those, let the spires go out of focus there. Yes, like that. That's cool. And then maybe bump my aperture back up to 4. And then I think I'm going to rotate my light a little bit. You can stop watching now. I'm just tooling around. Let's see. Let's just see. Let's see if I can get something out of this. So let's do, with lighting, I tend to like do a big 90 degree chunks and then see if something is interesting there. And then you can always press it and hit C for, actually I think I need a 3D view active to hit C for channel haul. So I get my, channel haul, my Y rotation here. You can see the light sort of playing across the image as I drag and look for something interesting. You can also get kind of fancy and drag on another rotational axis. That's kind of cool. Getting a lot of nice sheen across there, maybe a little too much. Yeah, something along these lines, kind of cool looking. And then, like I said, render at a high resolution, especially if you're using GPU rendering. It's just so fast. You can go in and render this at 4K pretty easily and let that go. And then, yeah, with denoising and denoising on, this isn't going to take too long. So I'll let this cook for a minute. And then, yeah, that'll be our render, and we can dive in there in Photoshop. And here we are back in Photoshop with this rendered at 4K, so kind of a cool one with like a little bit of a valley beneath it. And here you see the the vector sculpting coming into play with the way these are angled in on both sides and the sort of part in between, like it'd be parting hair. Yeah, so anyway, just grab some cool replica mesh, prototype meshes off of ArtStation, support your fellow artists, buy something there, and play around and mine for some art.
Yum, yum!